everybody, what's up and welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Liz, and today we're going to be discussing a true crime case that an urban legend has basically been made because we're talking about the urban legend of the babysitter and the man upstairs. Now, we know it as the phone rings, there's a whisper on the other end. The babysitter then hangs up, and the phone rings over and over again, and the same question is asked. Have you checked the children upstairs? The babysitter hangs up, then calls the police, who then says they'll trace the call. She hangs up again, the phone rings again, but it's the same whisper. She hangs up. Then another phone call comes in, and it's the police. And the police then tells the babysitter that the prank caller is coming from inside the house. Well, this, my friends, this urban legend is based on the murder of Jannett Christman. Now, Jannett Christman was born on March 21st of 1936. Her family just moved from Louisville, Missouri to Columbia. Now her family owned and operated a local restaurant in town called Ernie's, and they lived above it. They were a very well-respected family in the community, and Jannett was really known as being like an independent, pious, and a very, very mature looking girl for her age. And because of this, she got a lot of unwanted attention from older men looking at her, but she paid no mind to it. She just didn't, it wasn't on her radar. It's something that it didn't bother her. Now, on Saturday, March 18th of 1950, she had agreed to babysit for one of the couples that she regularly babysat for. And this was to babysit their 3-year-old son. And her friends also tried to convince her to not babysit and to go to a party, but instead she decided to babysit because she had one last payment installment on her burgundy suit that she was trying to purchase for Easter. So she arrived at the Romack household at 7:30 p.m. that evening, and the couple then told her that their son was already asleep. After this, the husband ends up showing Jannett how to load the shotgun that he specifically kept near the front door of the house in case anybody came to the porch, and if that happened, for her to turn the light on. They soon left after this, and then Jannett was alone in the house with the 3-year-old boy asleep upstairs. At about 10:35, a call comes into the police department, and Ray McCowan answered and heard what he has never been able to get out of his head. He heard screams and the words, "Come quick," and then dial tone. Before the dial tone happened, he didn't know what to say. And he knew that this was not a prank. And he couldn't really do anything because the switchboard was closed, so they couldn't do a trace on the phone call. Well, Ann Romack, the wife of the couple that Jannett is babysitting for, she calls to check in but gets a busy signal. She just kind of assumes that the phone was off the hook because Jannett was sleeping, so she doesn't really think of it. Well, they come home at around 1:30 a.m., but they notice that the light is on, like the porch light is on. So Ed, Ann's husband, went to unlock the front door, but also noticed that it was already unlocked. He then came face to face with Jannett Christman's body. She was beaten and strangled to death, laying in a pool of her own blood on the floor in the living room. This happened 3 days shy of her 14th birthday. Jannett had wounds on either side of her head that was made by a small instrument, and the cord from an electric iron was wrapped around her neck. Now, Ed and Ann checked on their son, who was asleep upstairs, but he was okay. They then called the police, and the police shortly arrive after this. Well, here's the thing. Where this murder took place, there was kind of like they didn't know whose jurisdiction it was. So the Missouri State Police was called, and also the regular sheriff's department was called. They both came to the scene, and they kind of fought over the scene, which we'll kind of talk about a little bit later. But so they believe that the perpetrator came in through a broken side window, and then a canvass of the scene was done. All fingerprints, blood, and DNA evidence that was lifted in the house and outside the house was taken, and then the police shifted focus on who could have done this. Now, police would focus on one man in particular. They would focus on a man named Robert Mueller. Robert Mueller was 27 years old, he was married, and he was an ex-serviceman who also managed a restaurant. He knew Ed Romack, and he had also known Jannett. He made advances towards her that were in a sexual manner. He was also known to be very inappropriate and have his sights on younger women as well, which is why they automatically assumed that he was a suspect. The night of the murder as well, he went to the same function that the Romacks went to, but he had excused himself and he was gone for about a 2-hour span. This automatically put a giant target on his back, and obviously, other than his advances towards Jannett. On March 21st of 1950, Jannett was buried in that same burgundy suit that she was trying to save and pay for Easter on her 14th birthday. And this case would remain active for a while. In May 4th of 1950, this is when Robert Mueller was taken into custody, but he's actually taken to a farm outside of Columbia. We don't really know what happened at this farm. All we know is that they returned early the next morning and he took a polygraph test and he passed. He was never charged with her murder, and he also sued the sheriff and the Missouri State Police that took him and were holding him illegally because of it was illegal actions as to what they were doing. Now, a look back onto this case, specifically the night of the murder, when the Missouri State Police came out, they had tracking hounds to follow the killer's scent that they picked up at the house. And when they followed this scent, it did not lead them to the Mueller house. It then led them in a different direction to a man that actually had approached Jannett's friend Lois Terry just a week prior. This man lived on West Worley, which is about a half-mile away from the Romack house. Now, Lois Terry wouldn't talk about this for a long time. When she did finally talk about it, she said the most unimaginable thing. About a week before the murder of Jannett, a sinister-looking man knocked on the door of the house she was babysitting for. She also went on to say that she will never forget what this man looks like. And when she learned of her friend's killing and the possibility of her being a potential victim, she never babysat again after this. She was terrified, but it wouldn't be her only run-in with this man. About 7 years after the murder, she's married and she moves to St. Louis. And upon moving, obviously, you make new friends. She runs into a new friend and her friend's husband. And lo and behold, she's stricken with that same fear, and she tells her husband, Bill, about this man. She tells him that they just met the killer of her friend. But her husband just simply shrugged it off and convinced her it wasn't true. Lois then continued to live with this secret for years, even sleeping with the lights on when her husband went away. And after moving back to Columbia and her husband's passing, she remained quiet until she read a column about Jannett's murder. This is when she's finally able to speak her piece about her friend's murder. After this admission, there was a look back into the investigation in the murder and a search into peeping toms and abusive spouses made. There was also a look into fingerprint records, but there wasn't any. No records were found. So you remember the evidence I told you about earlier? There was no record of evidence lifted from the scene. There was no evidence to be found. In addition to this, the sheriff that investigated the murder and the police chief that fought with the sheriff over jurisdiction both collected evidence and refused to share it. Now, a circuit judge by the name of Frank Coney then collected both sets of this evidence to keep them for future reference. But they too seem to have disappeared when the courthouse was renovated. Suspicious, huh? To this day, the murder of Jannett Christman is unsolved and remains the urban legend of the babysitter. What are your thoughts? Leave them in the comments down below. I would love to know.